Chapter 5 Part 2 of The Worst Journey in the World, Volume 1 by Apsley Cherry-Garrard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 5 The Depôt Journey Part 2. The return of the pony party from One Ton Depôt. From a letter written by Bowers. As our loads were so light, Titus thought it would be better for the ponies to do their full march in one stretch and so have a longer rest. We therefore decided to forego lunch and have a good meal on camping. The recent trails were fresh enough to follow and so saved us steering by compass, which is very difficult, as the needle will only come to rest after you have been standing still for about a minute. That march was extraordinary. The snowy mist hid all the distant objects and made all close ones look gigantic. Although we were walking on a flat undulating plain, one could not get away from the impression that the ground was hilly, quite steep in places with deep hollows by the wayside. Suddenly a herd of apparent cattle would appear in the distance. Then you would think, no, it's a team of dogs broken loose and rushing towards you. In another moment one would be walking over the black dots of some old horse droppings which had been the cause of the hallucinations. Since then I have often been completely taken in by appearances under certain conditions of light, and the novelty has worn off. Sastrugi are the hard waves formed by wind on a snow surface. These are seldom more than a foot or so in height, and often so obscured as to be imperceptible irregularities. On this occasion they often appeared like immense ridges until you walked over them. After going about 10 miles we spotted a tiny black triangle in the dead white void ahead. It was over a mile away and was the lunch camp of the dogs. We were fairly close before they broke camp and hurriedly packed up. I thought they looked rather sheepish at having been caught up, like the hare and the tortoise again. Still we had been marching very quickly and Scott was delighted to see Weary Willie going so well. They then dashed off, and after completing just over 12 miles we reached Pagoda Cairn, where a bale of fodder had been left. Here we camped and threw up our walls as quickly as possible to shelter the beasts from the cold wind. Weary was the most annoying. He would deliberately back into his wall and knock the whole structure down. In the case of my own pony, I had to put the wall out of his reach, as his aim in life was to eat it, generally beginning at the bottom. He would diligently dislodge a block and bring down the whole fabric. One cannot be angry with the silly beggars. Titus says a horse has practically no reasoning power. The thing to do is simply to throw up another wall and keep on at it. The weather cleared during the night, and the next day, February 19th, we started off under ideal conditions. The sun was already dipping pretty low, marks easy to pick up, and on this occasion we could plainly see a cairn over 7 miles away, raised by the mirage. The only trouble about seeing things so far off is that they take such an awful time to reach. Mirage is a great feature down here, and one of the most common of optical phenomena on the Barrier. It is often difficult to persuade oneself that open water does not lie ahead. We passed the scene of Weary Willie's fight with the dogs during the march, and also had an amusing argument as to a dark object on the snow ahead. At first we thought it was the dog camp again, but it turned out to be an empty biscuit tin. Such is the deceptive nature of the light. Later we sighted our old blizzard camp, and decided to utilize the walls again. Weary Willie was decidedly worse, and had to be literally jumped along by the pony to which he was attached. Within half a mile of the walls, Weary refused to go farther, and after wasting some time in vain efforts to urge him on, we had to camp where we were, having only done 10½ miles. This was very sad, but I took hope from the fact that Titus, who is usually pretty pessimistic, had not yet given up hopes of getting him back alive. He had an extra whack of oats at the expense of the other ponies, and my big beast made up for his shortage by hauling the sledge towards him with his tethered leg and forcing his nose into our precious biscuit tank, out of which he helped himself liberally at our expense. The sledges were now too light to anchor the animals, so we had to peg them down with anything we could and bank them up with snow. Weary was better the next day, February 20th, but we decided at the outset to go no farther than Bluff Camp, where we had left some fodder. This was barely 10 miles off. Yet my old animal showed signs of lassitude before the end. There was nothing alarming, however, and we saw the depôt over 5 miles off, which interested the beasts, who see these things and somehow connect them in the backs of their silly old heads with food and rest. Weary Willie made a decided improvement, so we camped in high spirits. Captain Scott had asked me if possible to take some theodolite observations for the determination of the position of Bluff Camp. Ours is much farther off and farther beyond the Bluff than the old Discovery Depôt A, which was practically the same position Shackleton used. In both cases Scott and Shackleton were keeping nearer the coast. Now, however, that the Beardmore had been discovered, we can aim straight for that, which takes one farther east by at least 15 miles off the Bluff. This is rather an advantage, I think, as, close into this remarkable headland, the onward movement of the Barrier, arrested by the immovable hills, causes a terrific chaos of crevasses off the cliffs at the end. These extend many miles, and include some chasms big enough to take the Terra Nova all standing. Needless to remark, one is well clear of this sort of scenery with ponies, hence our course. I was unable to get any observations, unfortunately, as it clouded over almost at once, and later in the day started to snow without wind. This often happens before a bliz, and as we were anxious about the ponies, to say nothing of our own shortage of biscuit, we felt a trifle apprehensive. It was very gloomy when we left camp at midnight, as the midnight sun was already cartwheeling the southern horizon, the first sign of autumn. Also the season had undoubtedly broken up, and the sky was covered with low stratus clouds as thick as a hedge. We lost sight of the cairn almost at once, and followed the remains of old tracks for a little while, till the snowy gloom made it impossible to see them. You will remember that it was at the Bluff Camp that Teddy Evans returned with the 3 weak ponies, so there were plenty of traces of our march now. Just on 4 miles from the start I saw a small mound some distance to the west, and struck over there. It was a small cairn without the signs of a camp, and rather puzzled me at the time. As I shall mention it later, I will call it X for convenience. We then pushed on, and I found steering most difficult. In the fuzzy nothingness ahead, one could see no point on which to fix the eye, and the compass required standing still to look at it every time. Our sledging compasses are spirit ones, and as steady as a small hand compass could possibly be. You will understand, however, that owing to the proximity of the magnetic pole, the pull on the needle is chiefly downwards. It is forced into a horizontal position by balancing weight on the north side, so it is obvious that its direction power is greatly reduced. On the ship, owing to the vibration of the engines and the motors, we were absolutely unable to steer by the compass at all when off the region of the magnetic pole. On this occasion, February 21, we zigzagged all over the place. First I went ahead, and Oates said I zigzagged. Then he went ahead, and I understood at once, as it was impossible to walk straight for 2 consecutive minutes. However, we plodded along with frequent stoppages till the wind came away, and then, having determined the direction of that, steered by keeping the snow on our backs. The wind was not strong enough to be unpleasant, and all was well. We legged it into the void for nearly 7 miles beyond X cairn, when I suddenly found myself only a few yards away from another cairn. This shows that somehow, without the use of tracks or landmarks, we had marched 7 miles without being able to see 30 yards, and had yet hit off the direct track to a T. Of course it was only coincidence, though some people might credit themselves with superlative navigating powers on such evidence. The wind increased, and with the knowledge I now have of blizzards, I would camp at once. Then I thought it better to shove on, as the ponies were marching splendidly. The danger lay in the fact that, though it is easy enough for you to march with the wind behind, you can't march for ever, and you will probably get tired before the wind does. Camping in a stiff breeze is always difficult, to say nothing of a gale, and for 3 men with 5 ponies to manage would be well nigh impossible. Fortunately for us this was not really a blizzard, though it was quite near enough to one. The sky broke later and showed the Bluff and White Island, and then the scurrying clouds of drift would encircle us to break again and come on again. After having done 17 miles we got a lull and stopped to camp right away. We were pretty quick about it, and fortunately got the ponies picketed, the tent pitched, before the wind came down on us again. We were pretty hungry by the time the walls were erected. Still we were quite happy, ate everything we could get, except the 3 lumps of sugar I always kept for old Uncle Bill out of my whack. The little blow blew itself out towards the evening, and in perfect calm and sunshine I got a splendid set of observations. Erebus and Terror were showing up as clear as a bell, and I got a large number of angles for Evans' survey. We started out as usual, and had the most pleasant as well as the longest of our return marches on the last day of summer, February 22. We did 18 miles right off the reel. The sun was brilliant from midnight onwards. He now half immersed himself below the horizon for a short interval once in 24 hours. All old cairns were visible a tremendous distance, 6 or 7 miles at least for big ones. Mount Terror lay straight ahead, and looked so clear that it seemed impossible to imagine it 70 miles away. At the end of our march we saw a small cairn beyond our 8th outward camp mound. Nobody would have rigged up another cairn so close without an object, so the thought of a dead horse flashed through my mind at once. Titus was so sure that Blücher would never get back, that he had bet Gran a biscuit on it. I saw the cairn had a fodder bale on the top, and later saw a note made fast to the wire. It was in Teddy Evans' handwriting, and to our surprise recorded Blossom's death. Titus was so sure that Blossom would survive Blücher that we started to think back, and thus the mystery of X cairn was clear to me. I was quite certain now that both the ancient ponies had died, and that Jimmy Pigg had returned alone. The following day, February 23rd, was a good marching day also, but a bit cloudy latterly. We did 14 miles, as this evidence of pony failure made us all the more anxious about ours, though really they were going very well. About 8 miles on we came to one of Evans' camps, and the solitary pony wall told its own tale of death of the other 2. He must have had a miserable return. At 11 miles there were 2 bales of fodder depôted, and we were only 50 miles odd from our destination off Cape Armitage, and had 1 meal over 3 days' food. If, therefore, we could average 15 miles a day, that would suffice. It was a silly risk in view of blizzards and other possibilities, chiefly our own inexperience. As it was, I took it and left the fodder there for the next year. February 24th was another march into impenetrable gloom. Fortunately Corner Camp, though dark enough, was not shaded in mist. I examined it for notes and evidence and found some. The sun set properly now, and had we been farther from home I should have changed to day marching. I have seldom seen such a scene of utter desolation as Corner Camp presented on that gloomy day. The fog then settled down, and, like people of the mist, we struck off blindly to the northwest. At 3:15 a.m. a light southerly breeze came away. I dreaded a blizzard with so little pony food, and already regretted my folly in leaving the fodder. After doing 12 miles we had to camp, as it was impossible even to march straight in the white haze. We made 5 colossal walls and turned in, hoping for the best. Fortune favours the reckless as well as the brave at times, and it did this time, as the blizzard still held off. The signs of one impending were unmistakable notwithstanding. Weary Willie did less well on February 25th, and as the surface became heavier we had to camp after only doing 11 miles. I thought best, in view of the threatening appearance of the weather, to have a 6 hours' rest and march into Safety Camp the same day, a distance of 8 miles. We found to our horror that Gran had dropped the top cap of our primus at the last camp. Cold food stared us in the face. However, we did manage to melt some snow for a cheering drink by cutting a piece of tin as near the shape of the cap as possible. Our biscuit was finished owing to the ravages of my pony. Before turning in I saw some specks to the north, and skipping my theodolite on its tripod, looked through the telescope and saw 2 tents and a number of skis stuck up. This was Scott's man-hauling party, together with Jimmy Pigg, going out to Corner Camp. This, we concluded, was either a man-hauling or a man and beast party bound for Corner Camp. We overslept, and so did not get away until the afternoon. It was still very cloudy and threatening. I found that I had steered considerably to the southward of the right direction in the fog, and it is lucky we met with no crevasses off White Island. Safety Camp at last appeared, and the last 4 miles seemed interminable. We had given the animals their last feed before starting, not a particle remained, but they stuck it. The surface was very heavy. Once, however, that they had seen the camp they never stopped. I suppose they knew they were nearly home. We marched in about 9:30 p.m. and I said thank God when I looked at the weather and the empty sledges. The dogs were in the camp, also the dome tent. We had some tents shaped like a dome in addition to those we used for sledging, out of which Uncle Bill, the real Uncle Bill Wilson, and Meares emerged. We soon had the ponies behind walls and well fed, borrowed the primus for ourselves, and had a square meal of pemmican and biscuit with fids of seal liver in it. End of Bowers' account. The return of the dog party. The history of the dog teams was eventful. We travelled fast, doing nearly 78 miles in the first 3 days, by which time we were approaching Corner Camp. The dogs were thin and hungry, and we were pushing them each day, just so long as they could pull, running ourselves for the most part. Scott determined to cut the corner, that is, to miss Corner Camp and cut diagonally across our outward track. It was not expected that this would bring us across any badly crevassed area. We started on the evening of February 20th in a very bad light. It was coldish with no wind. After going about 3 miles I saw a drop in the level of the Barrier, which the sledge was just going to run over. I shouted to Wilson to look out, but he had already jumped on to the sledge, for he was running, having seen Stareek put his paws through. It was a nasty crevasse, about 20 feet across, with blue holes on both sides. The sledge ran over, and immediately on the opposite side was brought up by a large haystack of pressure, which we had not seen owing to the light. Meares' team, on our left, never saw any sign of pressure. The light was so bad that we never saw this cairn of ice until we ran into it. We ran level for another 2 miles, Meares and Scott on our left. We were evidently crossing many crevasses. Quite suddenly we saw the dogs of their team disappearing, following one another, just like dogs going down a hole after some animal.
"In a moment," wrote Scott, "the whole team was sinking 2 by 2. We lost sight of them, each pair struggling for foothold. Osman, the leader, exerted all his strength and kept a foothold. It was wonderful to see him. The sledge stopped and we leapt aside. The situation was clear in another moment. We had been actually travelling along the bridge, or snow covering, of a crevasse. The sledge had stopped on it, whilst the dogs hung in their harness in the abyss, suspended between the sledge and the leading dog. Why the sledge and ourselves didn't follow the dogs we shall never know."
We of the other sledge stopped hurriedly, tethered our team and went to their assistance with the Alpine rope. Osman, the big leader, was in great difficulties. He crouched, resisting with all his enormous strength the pull of the rope upon which the team hung in their harness in mid air. It was clear that if Osman gave way the sledge and dogs would probably all be lost down the crevasse. First we pulled the sledge off the crevasse and drove the tethering pegs and driving stick through the cross pieces to hold it firm. Scott and Meares then tried to pull up the rope from Osman's end, while we hung on to the sledge to prevent it slipping down the crevasse. They could not move it an inch. We then put the strain as much as possible onto a peg. Meanwhile 2 dogs had fallen out of their harness into the crevasse, and could be seen lying on a snow ledge some 65 feet down. Later they curled up and went to sleep. Another dog, as he hung, managed to get some purchase for his feet on the side of the crevasse, and a free fight took place among several more of them as they dangled, those that hung highest using the backs of those under them to get a purchase.
"It takes one a little time," wrote Scott, "to make plans under such sudden circumstances, and for some minutes our efforts were rather futile. We could not get an inch on the main trace of the sledge or on the leading rope, which was binding Osman to the snow with a throttling pressure. Then thought became clearer. We unloaded our sledge, putting in safety our sleeping bags with the tent and the cooker. Choking sounds from Osman made it clear that the pressure on him must soon be relieved. I seized the lashing off Meares' sleeping bag, passed the tent poles across the crevasse, and with Meares managed to get a few inches on the leading line. This freed Osman, whose harness was immediately cut. Then, securing the Alpine rope to the main trace, we tried to haul up together. One dog came up and was unlashed, but by this time the rope had cut so far back at the edge that it was useless to attempt to get more of it. But we could now unbend the sledge, and do that for which we should have aimed from the first, namely, run the sledge across the gap and work from it. We managed to do this, our fingers constantly numbed. Wilson held on to the anchored trace, whilst the rest of us laboured at the leader end. The leading rope was very small, and I was fearful of it breaking, so Meares was lowered down a foot or two to secure the Alpine rope to the leading end of the trace. This done, the work of rescue proceeded in better order. 2 by 2 we hauled the animals up to the sledge, and one by one cut them out of their harness. Strangely, the last dogs were the most difficult, as they were close under the lip of the gap, bound in by the snow-covered rope. Finally, with a gasp, we got the last poor creature onto firm snow. We had recovered 11 of the 13.
The dogs had been dangling for over an hour, and some of them showed signs of internal injuries. Meanwhile the 2 remaining dogs were lying down the crevasse on a snow ledge. Scott proposed going down on the Alpine rope to get them. All his instincts of kindness were aroused, as well as the thought of the loss of 2 of the team. Wilson thought it was a mad idea and very dangerous, and said so. asking however whether he might not go down instead of Scott if anybody had to go. Scott insisted, and we paid down the 90-foot Alpine rope to test the distance. The ledge was about 65 feet below. We lowered Scott, who stood on the ledge, while we hauled up the two dogs in turn. They were glad to see him, and little wonder. But the rescued dogs, which were necessarily running about loose on the Barrier in their mangled harnesses, chose this moment to start a free fight with the other team. With a hurried shout down the crevasse we had to rush off to separate them. I had been considerably mauled before this was done, also, incidentally, my heel. But at last we separated them and hauled Scott to the surface. It was all three of us could do, and our fingers were frost-bitten towards the end. Scott's interest in the incident, apart from the recovery of the dogs, was scientific. Since we were running across the line of cleavage when the dogs went down, it was to be expected that we should be crossing the crevasses at right angles, and not be travelling, as actually happened, parallel to or along them. While we were getting him up the 60-odd feet to which we had lowered him, he kept muttering, "I wonder why this is running the way it is. You expect to find them at right angles." And when down the crevasse he wanted to go off exploring, but we managed to persuade him that the snow ledge upon which he was standing was utterly unsafe, and indeed we could see the nothingness below through the blue holes in the shelf. Another regret was that we had no thermometer. The temperature of the inside of the Barrier is of great interest, and a fairly reliable record of the average temperature throughout the year might have been obtained when so far down into it. Altogether we could congratulate ourselves on a fortunate ending to a nasty business. We expected several more miles of crevasses, and the wind was getting up, driving the surface drift like smoke over the ground, with a very black sky to the south. We pitched the tent, had a good meal, and mended the dog harness, which had been ruthlessly cut in clearing the dogs. Luckily we found no more crevasses, for it was now blowing hard and rescue work would have been difficult, and we pushed on as far as possible that night, doing 11 miles after lunch and 16 for the day. It had been strenuous, for we had been working in or over the crevasse for 2½ hours, and dogs and men were tired out. It cleared and became quite warm as we camped. There was a pleasant air of friendship in the tent that night, rather more than usual. That is generally the result of this kind of business. We reached Safety Camp next day, February 22nd, anxious for news of the ship's doings, the landing of Campbell's party, and the ponies which had been sent back from the Bluff depôt. Lieutenant Evans, Ford and Keohane, the pony leaders, were there, but only one pony. The other two had died of exhaustion soon after they had left us, and we had passed the cairns which marked their graves without knowledge. Their story was grim, and they had had a mournful journey back. First Blossom, then Blücher collapsed, their ends being hastened by the blizzard of February 1st. The crevasse incident, followed by the news of the loss of the ponies, was a blow to Scott, and his mind was also uneasy about Atkinson and Crean, whom we had left here and who had disappeared, leaving no record. Nor was the report from Terra Nova here, so we judged that the missing men and the report must be at Hut Point. After 3 or 4 hours' sleep, and a cup of tea and a biscuit, we started man-hauling with cooker and sleeping bags. The former because we were to have our good meal at the hut, the latter in case we were hung up. Travelling over the sea ice as far as the gap, from which we saw that the open sea reached to Hut Point, we made our way into the hut, and there was a mystery. The accumulations of ice which we found in it were dug away. There was a notice outside dated February 8th, saying mail for Captain Scott is in the bag inside south door. We hunted everywhere, but there was no Atkinson, nor Crean, nor mail, nor the things which the ship was to have bought. All kinds of wild theories were advanced. By the presence of a fresh onion and some bread, it was clear that the ship's party had been there, but the rest was utterly vague. It was then suggested that we were expected back about this time, and that the missing men had been sledging to Safety Camp around Cape Armitage on the very shaky sea ice, while we passed them as we came through the gap. Sledge tracks were found leading on to the sea ice. We started back in doubt. Scott was terribly anxious, we were all tired, and the depôt never seemed to come nearer. It was not until we were some 200 yards from it that we saw the extra tent. "Thank God," I heard Scott mutter under his breath, and "I believe you are even more anxious than I was, Bill." Atkinson had the ship's mail, signed by Campbell. "Every incident of the day," Scott wrote, "pales before the startling contents of the mail bag which Atkinson gave me. A letter from Campbell setting out his doings and the findings of Amundsen established in the Bay of Whales." Strongly as Scott tries to word this, it quite fails to convey how he felt, and how we all felt more or less, in spite of the warning conveyed in the telegram from Madeira to Melbourne. For an hour or so we were furiously angry, and were possessed with an insane sense that we must go straight to the Bay of Whales and have it out with Amundsen and his men in some undefined fashion or other, there and then. Such a mood could not and did not bear a moment's reflection, but it was natural enough. We had just paid the first instalment of the heart-breaking labour of making a path to the Pole, and we felt, however unreasonably, that we had earned the first right of way. Our sense of co-operation and solidarity had been wrought up to an extraordinary pitch, and we had so completely forgotten the spirit of competition that its sudden intrusion jarred frightfully. I do not defend our burst of rage, for such it was. I simply record it as an integral human part of my narrative. It passed harmlessly, and Scott's account proceeds as follows.
One thing only fixes itself definitely in my mind. The proper, as well as the wiser, course for us is to proceed exactly as though this had not happened, to go forward and do our best for the honour of the country without fear or panic. There is no doubt that Amundsen's plan is a very serious menace to ours. He has a shorter distance to the Pole by 60 miles. I never thought he could have got so many dogs safely to the ice. His plan of running them seems excellent, but above and beyond all, he can start his journey early in the season, an impossible condition with ponies.
We read that on leaving McMurdo Sound the Terra Nova coasted eastward along the Barrier face, with Campbell and his men, who were to be landed on King Edward VII's Land if possible. She surveyed the face of the Barrier as she went from Cape Crozier to longitude 170° west, whence she shaped a course direct for Cape Colbeck, which Priestley states in his diary, is only 200 feet high according to our measurement, and looks uncommonly like common or garden barrier. Here they met the heavy pack, and were forced to return without finding any place where the cliff was low enough to allow Campbell and his 5 men to land. They coasted back, making for an inlet known as Balloon Bight. Priestley tells the story. February 1st, 1911. Our trip has not been without outcome after all, and all our doubts about wintering here or in South Victoria Land have been settled in a startling fashion. About 10 o'clock we steamed into a deep bay in the Barrier, which proved to be Shackleton's Bay of Whales, and our observations in the last expedition, Shackleton's, have been wonderfully upheld. Our present sights and angles, Pennell tells me, are about a duplicate of those that we got. Every one has always been doubtful about the Bay of Whales, we reported, but now the matter has been set at rest finally. There is no doubt now that the Balloon Bight and the neighbouring bay marked on Discovery's chart have become merged into one, and further, that since that period the resulting bight has broken back considerably more. Indeed, it seems to have altered a good deal on its western border since our visit to it in 1908. Otherwise it is the same deceptive caves and shadows, having from a distance the appearance of rock exposures, the same pressure-ridged cliffs, the same undulations behind, the same expanse of sea ice, and even the same crowds of whales. I hope that before we leave we shall find it possible to survey the bight, but that depends on the weather. It was satisfactory to find all our observations coming right, and everybody backing up Shackleton, and I turned in last night feeling quite cheerful, and believing that there would be a really good chance of the Eastern Party finding a home on the Barrier here, our last chance of surveying King Edward's Land. However, man proposes but God disposes, and I was waked up by Lily at 1 o'clock this morning by the astounding news that there was a ship in the bay at anchor to the sea ice. All was confusion on board for a few minutes, everybody rushing up on deck with cameras and clothes. It was no false alarm. There she was within a few yards of us, and what is more, those of us who had read Nansen's book recognised the Fram. She is rigged with 4 1/2 sails, and as she has petrol engines she has no funnel. Soon afterward the men forward declared that they had sighted a hut on the Barrier, and the more excited declared that there was a party coming out to meet us. Campbell, Levick and myself were therefore lowered over the side of the ship while she was being made fast, and set off on ski towards the dark spot we could see. This proved to be only an abandoned depôt, and we returned to the ship, where Campbell, who in his anxiety to be the first to meet them had left us beginners far behind, had opened up conversation with the night watchman. He informed us that there were only 3 men on board, and that the remainder of them were settling Amundsen in winter quarters about as far from the depôt as the depôt from the ship. Amundsen is coming to visit the Fram to morrow, and we are staying long enough to allow Pennell and Campbell to interview him. They reached the pack about January 6th and were through it by the 12th, so they did not have as bad a time as we did. They informed us that Amundsen does not intend to make his descent on the Pole until next year. This is encouraging, as it means a fair race for the next summer, though the news we are bringing to them will keep the Western Main Party on tenterhooks of excitement all the winter. Our plans have of course been decided for us. We cannot, according to etiquette, trench on their winter quarters, but must return to McMurdo Sound and then go off towards Robertson Bay, and settle ourselves as best we can. While we are waiting events we have not been by any means idle. Rennick got a sounding, 180 fathoms, and the crew have killed 3 seals, including one beautiful silver crab eater. Lilly has secured water samples at 50, 100, 150 and 170 fathoms, and has had a haul with the plankton net, and Williams is endeavouring to fit up the trawl for a haul to morrow, if we get time and appropriate weather. I got a roll of films and gave the roll to Drake to take home and get developed in Christchurch. There are photographs of the Fram and the Terra Nova together, of their depôt, and of the ice cliffs and the sea ice, which is decidedly overcut, the thick snow having been removed in places by the swell until a ledge several yards wide is lying just submerged. It has been calm all the night, with the snow falling at intervals. February 4th, 1911. I was waked at 7 o'clock this morning by Levick demanding the loan of my camera. It appears that Amundsen, Johansen and 6 men had arrived at the Fram this morning at about 6:30 a.m. and had come over to interview Campbell and Pennell. Campbell, Pennell and Levick then went back to breakfast with them and stayed until nearly noon, when they returned telling us to expect Amundsen, Nielsen, the first lieutenant of the Fram, who was taking her back after landing the party, and a young lieutenant whose name none of us caught, to lunch. After lunch a party of officers and men went to see the rest of the Norwegians, see over the ship and say good bye. I did not go, and was able to show Lieutenant Jensen over the ship in the meantime. About 3 o'clock we let go the ice anchor and parted from the Fram, steaming along the ice very slowly in order to dredge from 190 to 300 fathoms. The haul was successful, about 2 buckets full of the muddy bottom being secured, and still more valuable catch from the biological point of view were 2 long crinoids about a couple of feet in length and in fairly perfect condition, which had become attached to the outside of the net. We are now standing along the Barrier, continuing our survey to the bight we first struck, after which we sail to Cape Evans, stay a day there and then make up north to try and effect a lodgment on the coast beyond Cape Adare. During the morning Browning and I examined the ice face forming the eastern face of the bight. We found it to be made of clear ice of grain from 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch in size and full of bubbles. On the way there I took a couple of photographs of some of Amundsen's dogs, and when we were there I got a few of crevasses and caves in the Barrier face. Well, we have left the Norwegians and our thoughts are too full of them at present. The impression they have left with me is that of a set of men of distinctive personality, hard and evidently inured to hardship, good goers and pleasant and good humoured. All of these qualities combine to make them very dangerous rivals, but even did one want not to, one cannot help liking them individually in spite of the rivalry. One thing I have particularly noticed is the way in which they are refraining from getting information from us, which might be useful to them. We have news which will make the Western Party as uneasy as ourselves, and the world will watch with interest a race for the Pole next year, a race which may go any way, and may be decided by luck or by dogged energy and perseverance on either side. The Norwegians are in dangerous winter quarters, for the ice is breaking out rapidly from the Bay of Whales, which they believe to be Borchgrevink's Bight, and they are camped directly in front of a distinct line of weakness. On the other hand, if they get through the winter safely, and they are aware of their danger, they have unlimited dogs, the energy of a nation as northern as ourselves, and experience with snow travelling that could be beaten by no collection of men in the world. There remains the Beardmore Glacier. Can their dogs face it, and if so, who will get there first? One thing I feel, and that is that our Southern Party will go far before they permit themselves to be beaten by anyone, and I think that the 2 parties are very likely to reach the Pole next year, but God only knows which will get there first. A few of the things we learnt about the Norwegians are as follows. The engines from the Fram occupy only half the size of our wardroom. The petrol tanks have not needed replenishment since they left Norway, and their propeller can be lifted by 3 men. They kept fresh potatoes from Norway to the Barrier. Some of them must surely be renegade Irishmen. They have each a separate cabin 'tween decks on the Fram, and are very comfortable. They are using for transporting their stores to the hut 8 teams of 5 dogs each, working every alternate day. They intend to use for the Polar Journey teams of 10 dogs, each team working 1 day out of 2. Their dogs stop at a whistle, and if they make a break they can be stopped by overturning the sledge, empty or full as the case may be. They are 9 in the shore party and 10 in the ship. Their ship is going back to Buenos Aires with Nielsen in charge, and during the winter is to encircle the world, sounding all the way. They are not starting on the dash south this year, and do not yet know whether they will lay depots this year. They have 116 dogs, and 10 of these are bitches, so that they can rear pups, and have done so very successfully on the way out. The Fram acts like a cork in the sea. She rolls tremendously, but does not ship water, and during the voyage they have had the dogs running loose about the decks. There is a lot more miscellaneous information, but I may remember it more coherently a little later, when the main impressions of the rencontre are a little more faint. End of chapter 5, part 2.